For weeks after my termination, I was sitting across from Elena and Carlos Mendoza in Café Jumping Bean, a Pilsen institution where the walls were covered in local art celebrating Mexican heritage and conversations flowed seamlessly between English and Spanish. My laptop was open, surrounded by market research printouts, demographic studies, and a business plan that had consumed every waking hour since Elena's revelation. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The cafe smelled like fresh ground coffee and possibility. Around us, families navigated homework in 2 languages while parents discussed their small businesses over café con leche. This was the market Sterling had dismissed as too niche, a $1.9 trillion economy they couldn't see because they'd never bothered to look. Look at these numbers, Maya. Elena spread her research across our scarred wooden table. Latinos control $1.9 trillion in purchasing power annually. But here's the part that should terrify companies like Sterling: only 23% of major brands have dedicated Latino marketing strategies. And the ones that do? Most treat it like a translation service. Carlos leaned forward, his tablet displaying charts that made my pulse race. We've been tracking Latino market penetration for 2 years. Across major metropolitan areas. Chicago is sitting on a goldmine. Latino families here over-index on brand loyalty by 34%, spend 23% more on groceries than the national average, and when they find brands that respect their culture, they become advocates for life. I watched a teenager at the next table helping her grandmother navigate a tablet, switching effortlessly between Spanish explanations and English interfaces. 2 generations, 2 languages, 1 economic powerhouse that marketing agencies consistently underestimated. They're not just leaving money on the table, I said, pieces crystallizing in my mind. They're hemorrhaging market share to competitors who actually understand cultural nuance. But most companies don't even realize they're bleeding. Elena grinned, the expression I remembered from childhood when she'd figured out how to solve problems adults couldn't see. Exactly. And Maya, what if we didn't wait for them to figure it out? What if we built something that made it impossible for them to ignore Latino markets anymore? Carlos opened a video call on his tablet, connecting us to 3 other Latino marketing professionals in Los Angeles, Miami, and New York. Meet the team that's been waiting for someone like you to emerge. Sofia Hernandez appeared on screen from Miami, speaking from what looked like a vibrant co-working space. Maya, Carlos told me about Sterling. Same story, different city. I was the diversity hire at Castellanos and Associates for 4 years. Built their first successful campaign targeting Cuban-American families, increased client revenue by 280%, then watched them promote a white colleague to lead the ethnic marketing division. David Morales joined from New York, his background showing the busy energy of Manhattan. Similar experience at Hartwell Communications. I developed their first Puerto Rican market strategy, proved that bilingual campaigns outperformed translated materials by 400%, then got feedback that I was too focused on niche demographics. Patricia Vega connected from Los Angeles, her office decorated with awards that told a story of excellence systemically ignored. They want our cultural insights packaged and sanitized, delivered by people who look like their existing leadership teams. But Maya, what if we stopped trying to fit into their broken system and started building our own? For the next 3 hours, we designed something the marketing world had never seen. Not a traditional agency competing for scraps of Sterling's client base, the non-compete clause had actually forced us to think more creatively. We created a cultural intelligence consultancy. Companies wouldn't just hire us for campaigns, they'd hire us to understand markets they'd been systematically missing for decades. Here's what makes this different, Carlos explained, pulling up financial projections that made my hands tremble slightly. We're not competing with Sterling and agencies like them. We're creating a parallel ecosystem they can't access. Latino entrepreneurs, family-owned businesses, community organizations, an entire economy that operates below their radar. Elena added, and when mainstream companies finally realize what they're missing, we'll be the only ones who can unlock it for them. I liquidated my 401k that afternoon, $67,000 accumulated over 7 years of corporate loyalty. Elena cashed out her LA condo equity, bringing in another $80,000. Carlos contributed his network and seed funding from Latino business leaders in California who'd been waiting years for someone to build what we were proposing. We rented a 3-room office above Panaderia Nuevo Leon on 18th Street, where the smell of fresh bolillos and tres leches cake reminded us daily that culture wasn't just demographics, it was life, community, and economic power that traditional agencies had never learned to measure. Our first hire was Miguel Santos, a data analyst who'd been laid off from Nielsen when they restructured their ethnic marketing division. Miguel had been tracking Latino consumer behavior for 8 years, building databases that mainstream agencies ignored because they didn't understand what they were looking at. Companies don't realize what they're missing, Miguel explained on his first day, pulling up charts that validated everything we'd theorized. Latino families over-index on brand loyalty by 34% nationally, but in Chicago specifically, it's 42%. They spend 23% more on groceries, 31% more on children's education, and 28% more on family celebrations. When they find brands that respect their culture, customer lifetime value averages 67% higher than general market customers. Miguel's data revealed something even more powerful: Latino consumers actively sought out businesses that demonstrated cultural competency. They would drive further, pay more, and recommend brands to extended family networks when they felt genuinely understood rather than merely translated to. By month 3, our proof of concept was undeniable. Our first client, Midwest Community Bank, had struggled for years to penetrate Latino neighborhoods despite having branches in heavily Hispanic areas throughout Chicago. Their previous marketing had been the standard corporate approach: suburban messaging translated into Spanish by people who'd never set foot in Pilsen or Little Village. Generic families and stock photos that looked nothing like their actual customers. Financial products designed for nuclear families when many Latino families operated with extended kinship networks spanning multiple generations. We showed them something revolutionary: campaigns built around multi-generational financial planning, quinceañera savings accounts that acknowledged cultural celebrations as major life events, small business loans promoted at community festivals where relationships mattered more than credit scores. But the real breakthrough came when we introduced them to community partnerships. Instead of advertising at Latino customers, we helped them become part of Latino communities. Sponsoring Little League teams, supporting quinceañera celebrations, providing financial literacy workshops conducted in Spanish at community centers, the results weren't just good, they were paradigm shifting. In 6 months, Latino account openings increased 280%. Customer retention hit 94%, the highest in the bank's history. But most importantly, their Latino customers became advocates, referring family members at rates that dwarfed any traditional marketing campaign. Word travels fast in Chicago's business community, especially when it comes with numbers that make executives reconsider everything they thought they knew about market segmentation. My phone started ringing with inquiries from companies that had never given Latino marketing serious consideration. Insurance firms realized their Spanish-speaking customer base was growing 34% annually while their English-only campaigns plateaued. Retail chains wondered why their suburban locations thrived while urban stores with large Latino populations struggled to build customer loyalty. Healthcare systems discovering that Latino families made healthcare decisions differently, with multiple generations involved, cultural factors affecting treatment compliance, and communication preferences that traditional patient outreach completely missed. I hired strategically, focusing on talent that had been systematically overlooked by mainstream agencies. Maria Rodriguez, a creative director who'd been passed over for promotion at 3 different firms despite building award-winning campaigns that increased client revenue by millions. Her crime? Suggesting that Latino campaigns should be created by people who actually understood Latino culture rather than translated by non-native speakers. David Lopez, a strategist who understood the crucial differences between Mexican-American families who'd been in Chicago for 3 generations versus recent immigrants from Central America versus Puerto Rican families with completely different cultural touchstones. Nuances that focus groups conducted in Wheaton shopping malls would never capture. Ana Gutierrez, a digital specialist who'd identified how Latino social media usage patterns differed dramatically from general market assumptions. Latino families shared content across extended networks, valued video testimonials from community members, and made purchasing decisions based on recommendations from people who shared their cultural experiences. By month 6, we had 15 employees. And a client roster that included 2 Fortune 500 companies who'd quietly hired us to figure out why their Latino market penetration remained stagnant despite massive advertising spends. The non-compete clause that was supposed to sideline me had actually become our secret weapon. Instead of competing in Sterling's narrow world of corporate client relationships and suburban focus groups, I'd created a parallel universe they couldn't access. But the real transformation happened when I realized we weren't just building a business. We were creating an ecosystem. Latino entrepreneurs who'd been marginalized by mainstream agencies finally had strategic partners who understood their markets. Creative professionals who'd been tokenized at traditional firms could build careers based on authentic cultural expertise rather than ethnic window dressing. Elena and I were working late one Thursday evening, the office filled with the energy of a team that knew they were building something unprecedented, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Maya? This is Brad Martinez. From Sterling. The same Brad who'd watched me get fired without saying a word. The guy who'd anglicized his name and kept his head down while I fought battles he was too scared to join. I put him on speaker so Elena could hear. Brad. What can I do for you? Maya, I need to tell you something. About the Rodriguez account. His voice was shaky, like he was calling from a bathroom or empty conference room to avoid being overheard. What about it? Derek's been telling clients #fired for not fitting the culture. My culture just became their biggest market. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The 43rd floor of Sterling Marketing's Chicago headquarters offered a view that stretched across Lake Michigan, but today the gray November sky matched my mood perfectly. I'd been here since 6 a.m., finalizing the presentation that would change everything, or so I thought. 3 years. 3 years of being the only Latina on the creative team, watching my ideas get credited to colleagues who presented them better. 3 years of enduring comments like, Maya brings such authentic perspective, whenever Latino topics arose, as if my Northwestern MBA and 7 years of marketing experience were less relevant than my last name. 3 years of being told my direct communication style was too aggressive, while watching male colleagues get promoted for identical behavior labeled as leadership potential. I'd kept detailed notes in a leather journal my abuela Carmen had given me, every microaggression, every stolen idea, every time someone asked if I was the cleaning lady when I worked late in the office. Document everything, Mija, she'd taught me. In business, memory is worthless but evidence is gold. But today was different. Today I had numbers that couldn't be argued with. The Rodriguez insurance campaign hadn't just succeeded, it had shattered every projection Sterling had ever made about Latino market potential. $8.2 million in new revenue in 6 months. Customer retention rates that made their other campaigns look like amateur hour. Market penetration that had their competitors scrambling to figure out what they'd missed. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing this presentation, knowing it would either secure my promotion to creative director or mark me as a troublemaker who asked too many uncomfortable questions. The data was irrefutable. The strategy was bulletproof. The cultural insights were backed by research that went deeper than any focus group Derek Thompson had ever commissioned. The boardroom door clicked shut behind me as I entered, my heels echoing against the polished concrete floors, a sound that had once intimidated me but now felt like a countdown to vindication. Derek Thompson sat at the head of the table, his Northwestern MBA diploma practically gleaming behind him like a shrine to institutional privilege. Janet Walsh from HR flanked his right side, her expression carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that comes with practice and legal liability training. But there was a third person in the room I hadn't expected, Marcus Hoffman, Sterling's chief financial officer. His presence meant one of two things: either they were about to offer me a significant promotion, or they were about to make this termination expensive enough to require CFO approval. Maya, please sit. Derek's voice carried that forced warmth that men like him perfected in leadership seminars, where they learned to fire people with smiles. We need to discuss your future here at Sterling. I placed my presentation folder on the table with deliberate precision, but something in the air made me pause. The energy felt wrong. Derek wasn't making eye contact. Janet's legal pad was already filled with notes, before I'd said a word. Marcus was studying his phone with the kind of focused disinterest that screamed, I don't want to be here. This wasn't the energy of a performance review or promotion discussion. This felt like an execution. I placed my presentation folder on the table, but something in the air made me pause. This wasn't the energy of a performance review. This felt like an execution. Before we start, I said, opening my folder, I want to show you the Q4 results from the Rodriguez campaign. Derek's hand moved slightly, a gesture that might have been dismissive to someone who hadn't spent 3 years reading his micro-expressions in meetings where my ideas were credited to other people. Maya, we've decided to go in a different direction, he said, sliding a manila envelope across the mahogany surface. This isn't about performance metrics. Your work has been adequate. But we've received feedback about cultural fit, team dynamics, communication style. Cultural fit. The phrase that had haunted every performance review, every missed promotion, every time I'd suggested we actually research the communities we claimed to serve instead of guessing what they wanted. Based on focus groups from Naperville. I thought about my abuela Carmen, who'd crossed the border with $27 and a determination that built a restaurant empire. How she'd taught me that adequate was a word people used when they couldn't admit excellence made them uncomfortable. I thought about my grandmother's hands, weathered from decades of running her small restaurant in Phoenix. How she'd taught me that respect isn't given, it's earned through results. How she'd built a business from nothing, speaking broken English but understanding profit margins better than most MBAs. The Rodriguez campaign exceeded every projection by 200%, I said, flipping open my folder despite the clear signals that this conversation was over before it started. Latino customer acquisition is up 340%. Their satisfaction scores in Spanish-speaking communities are the highest in company history. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Maya, this isn't about numbers, it's always about numbers. Derek. That's what business is. I leaned forward, my voice gaining the edge that had been labeled aggressive in every review. Unless you're telling me that a campaign that generated $8.2 million in new revenue somehow doesn't fit our culture of success. Janet Walsh cleared her throat, the sound cutting through the tension like a referee's whistle. Maya, we've had conversations with team members about collaborative approaches. Your tendency to challenge established processes. You mean when I asked why we'd never researched Latino buying patterns despite them being Chicago's largest minority demographic? Or when I suggested hiring Spanish-speaking focus group participants, instead of assuming what they wanted? This is exactly what we're talking about, Derek said, his practiced calm finally cracking. The adversarial approach. The constant questioning of leadership decisions. I closed my folder slowly, the sound echoing in the silence. Everything crystallized in that moment. This wasn't about collaboration or communication styles. This was about a company that wanted the profits from diversity without the discomfort of actually being diverse. Let me understand this correctly, I said, standing to match Derek's height. You're firing the person who created your most successful Latino campaign because she made you uncomfortable by suggesting you hire Latino people to work on Latino campaigns? Maya, we're prepared to offer an excellent severance package. Derek began, but I cut him off with a gesture my grandmother would have recognized. Is Jessica Wilson getting fired? I interrupted, thinking of my blonde colleague who'd taken credit for half my ideas in client meetings, then asked me to authenticate her presentations with cultural details. She questioned the Miller beer strategy for 3 months. Called it fundamentally flawed in front of the client. That was labeled thorough strategic thinking in her review. The silence stretched long enough to confirm what I already knew. Or Brad Martinez? I continued, naming the one other Latino employee in our division, a guy who kept his head down, never spoke Spanish in the office, and had changed his name from Alberto to Brad on his first day. He fits your culture better, right? Speaks perfect English. Never brings up uncomfortable demographics. Never suggests that maybe, just maybe, you should hire people who actually understand the markets you're trying to reach. Derek set down his pen with deliberate precision, the kind of controlled movement that screamed frustration barely held in check. Maya, we'll provide excellent references and honor all contractual obligations, including the 18-month non-compete clause. Security will escort you out. 18 months. They'd calculated this down to the day. Fire me now, enforce the non-compete clause, ensure I couldn't take my knowledge to their competitors during the crucial Q1 campaign season. By the time I was free to work again, the Rodriguez account would be stabilized under their proven leadership, and my insights would be old news. We'll also need you to return all client files, research materials, and delete any company-related documents from personal devices, Janet added, sliding a legal document across the table. Standard protocol for sensitive client information. I looked at the document, pages of legal language designed to strip me of everything I'd learned, built, and proven during 3 years of fighting for recognition in a company that had never intended to recognize me, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed my value lay in their client files and company research. They'd never understood that my real asset was something they couldn't delete or confiscate, a deep understanding of communities they'd spent years ignoring and a growing network of Latino professionals who were tired of being underestimated. That evening, I sat in my Pilsen apartment, the neighborhood Sterling's executives probably couldn't find on a GPS, staring at the termination letter and the legal documents. That effectively blacklisted me from Chicago's marketing industry for a year and a half. The non-compete clause took up half a page of legal language designed to ensure I couldn't take my experience to their competitors. My phone buzzed with texts from colleagues who'd already heard the news through Sterling's efficient gossip network. Most were sympathetic but careful. Nobody wanted to be seen associating with someone who'd been labeled a cultural misfit by leadership, but one message stood out. From Tyler Kim, a Korean-American creative director at a competing agency. Maya, heard what happened. This is bullshit. Coffee tomorrow? I have some thoughts. Another buzz. Elena, my cousin in Los Angeles, just landed at O'Hare. We need to Talk. This isn't the end, it's the beginning. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the neon signs in Spanish, the families walking together after dinner, the thriving businesses that operated in a language Sterling's executives had probably never heard spoken naturally in their North Shore suburbs. Every storefront represented customers that companies like Sterling were leaving on the table, not because they couldn't afford marketing services, but because nobody had bothered to speak their language. Elena arrived 2 hours later, carrying her laptop and a determination that reminded me why she'd built the fastest-growing Latino-owned marketing consultancy on the West Coast. "Show me everything," she said, settling onto my couch with the focused energy of someone who'd just identified a massive opportunity. "The termination letter, the non-compete clause, everything they think gives them power over you." I spread the documents across my coffee table. Elena studied them with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 5 years navigating similar corporate landmines in Los Angeles. "Maya, they just handed you the greatest gift they could possibly give." "How? Is being blacklisted from the industry a gift?" "Because they've defined their world too narrowly," Elena said, tapping the non-compete clause with her pen. "This prevents you from working for their competitors in traditional marketing. But it says nothing about cultural consulting. Nothing about community outreach. Nothing about serving clients they've never bothered to understand." She opened her laptop and pulled up a presentation that made my pulse quicken. "Look at these numbers. Latino purchasing power hit $1.9 trillion last year, but only 23% of major brands have dedicated Latino marketing strategies. Companies like Sterling are fighting over scraps while ignoring the fastest-growing consumer segment in American history." I stared at the data, feeling pieces click into place. "They're not just leaving money on the table, they're hemorrhaging market share to companies that actually understand cultural nuance," Elena finished. "Maya, what if this firing isn't the end of your career? What if it's the beginning of something they could never have let you build from inside their system?" 3 weeks after my termination, I was sitting across from Elena in Café Jumping Bean, a Pilsen institution where the walls were covered in local art and conversations flowed seamlessly between English and Spanish. My laptop was open, surrounded by market research printouts, demographic studies, and a business plan that had kept me awake for 72 straight hours. "Look at these numbers, Maya." Elena spread her own research across our scarred wooden table. "Latinos control $1.9 trillion in purchasing power. But here's the part that should terrify companies like Sterling: only 23% of major brands have dedicated Latino marketing strategies." I leaned back in my chair, watching a family at the next table navigate homework in 2 languages while parents discussed their small business over café con leche. This was the market Sterling had dismissed as too niche. "They're not just leaving money on the table," I said, pieces clicking together. "They're hemorrhaging market share to competitors who actually understand cultural nuance." Elena grinned, pulling out her phone to show me a video call request. "I want you to meet someone." The call connected to reveal Carlos Mendoza, Elena's business partner in LA, sitting in what looked like a trendy co-working space. "Maya, Elena's told me everything. I've been waiting for someone like you to emerge." Carlos's energy was infectious, even through the screen. "We've been tracking the Latino marketing space for 2 years. The opportunity is massive, but there's a problem: most agencies treat Latino marketing like a translation service." "Exactly," I said, thinking of Sterling's approach to Spanish campaigns. "Take English copy, run it through Google Translate. Add some mariachi music, call it cultural outreach." "Right. But what if we approached it completely differently?" Carlos leaned closer to his camera. "What if instead of adapting existing campaigns, we started with cultural insight and built outward?" Elena and I exchanged looks. This was bigger than revenge. This was revolution. Over the next month, we built something the marketing world had never seen. Not a traditional agency competing for scraps of Sterling's client base, the non-compete clause had actually forced us to think more creatively. We created a cultural intelligence consultancy. Companies didn't just hire us for campaigns, they hired us to understand markets they'd been blind to. I liquidated my 401k. Elena cashed out her LA condo equity. Carlos brought his network of Latino business leaders and creative professionals. We rented a 3-room office above a Mexican bakery on 18th Street, where the smell of fresh bolillos reminded us daily that culture wasn't just demographics, it was life. Our first hire was Miguel Santos, a data analyst who'd been laid off from Nielsen when they restructured their ethnic marketing division. Miguel had been tracking Latino consumer behavior for 8 years, building databases that mainstream agencies ignored. "Companies don't realize what they're missing," Miguel explained on his first day, pulling up charts that made my pulse quicken. "Latino families over-index on brand loyalty by 34%. They spend 23% more on groceries than the national average. And when they find brands that respect their culture, they become advocates for life. By month 3, our proof of concept was undeniable. Our first client, Midwest Community Bank, had struggled for years to penetrate Latino neighborhoods despite having branches in heavily Hispanic areas. Their previous marketing had been tone-deaf suburban messaging translated into Spanish. We showed them something different: campaigns built around familial financial planning, quinceañera savings accounts, small business loans promoted at community events. The results weren't just good, they were revolutionary. In 6 months, Latino account openings increased 280%. But more importantly, customer retention hit 94%, the highest in the bank's history. Word travels fast in Chicago's business community, especially when it comes with numbers that made executives pay attention. My phone started ringing with inquiries from companies that had never given Latino marketing serious consideration. Insurance firms realizing their Spanish-speaking customer base was their fastest-growing segment. Retail chains wondering why their suburban locations thrived while urban stores struggled. I hired strategically, focusing on talent that had been overlooked by mainstream agencies. Maria Rodriguez, a creative director who'd been passed over for promotion at 3 different firms despite building award-winning campaigns. David Lopez, a strategist who understood the difference between Mexican-American families in Chicago versus recent immigrants from Central America, nuances that focus groups in Wheaton would never capture. By month 6, we had 12 employees and a client roster that included 2 Fortune 500 companies. The non-compete clause that was supposed to sideline me had actually become my secret weapon. Instead of competing in Sterling's world, I'd created a parallel universe they couldn't access. But the real breakthrough came when I realized we weren't just building a business. We were building an ecosystem. Latino entrepreneurs, creative professionals, and business leaders who'd been marginalized by mainstream agencies finally had a place where their cultural knowledge was an asset, not a liability. Elena and I were working late one Thursday when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Maya? This is Brad Martinez. From Sterling. The same Brad who'd watched me get fired without saying a word. I put him on speaker so Elena could hear. Brad. What can I do for you? Maya, I need to tell you something. About the Rodriguez account. His voice was shaky, like he was calling from a bathroom or empty conference room. What about it? Derek's been telling clients that the Latino campaign success was a fluke. That it wasn't sustainable. But Maya, Rodriguez Insurance just pulled their entire account. They're moving to your firm. Elena and I locked eyes across the conference table. And Maya? That's not all. Word is getting out about how they fired you. Some of us are starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why the most successful campaign in company history got its creator fired. After Brad hung up, Elena and I sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the sounds of Pilsen at night, music from passing cars, families gathering on front porches, the rhythm of a community that Sterling's executives would never understand. They created their own problem, Elena said finally. I nodded, thinking about the 18 months Sterling had bought themselves with that non-compete clause. 18 months they could have used to adapt, to learn, to grow. Instead, they'd spent that time explaining away success they couldn't replicate. Now their biggest client was calling me directly. And they had no idea how to compete with something they'd never bothered to understand. The call came on a frigid Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my new corner office, windows facing both downtown Chicago and the Pilsen neighborhood where everything had started, when my assistant knocked. Maya, Derek Thompson from Sterling Marketing is holding on line 2. He says it's urgent regarding a client situation. I looked at the caller ID for a long moment. 14 months had passed since that glass conference room conversation. Corazon Cultural Strategies now employed 47 people across offices in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Miami. Our client roster included 3 Fortune 500 companies and a waiting list of brands desperate to unlock Latino markets they'd ignored for decades. Maya, Derek's voice carried none of its old authority. We need to talk. In person if possible. About what, Derek? I kept my tone professional, though my heart was racing with anticipation. Rodriguez Insurance. They've terminated their contract with us. Effective immediately. They're moving their entire $12 million account to your firm. I stared out my window at the mural on the building across the street, a vibrant celebration of Mexican heritage that would have made Sterling's executives uncomfortable. Rodriguez Insurance wasn't just any client. They were Sterling's second largest account and the company whose Latino campaign had supposedly been my adequate work. I'm sorry to hear that, Derek. Competition can be challenging. Maya, please. This isn't just Rodriguez. Familia Foods is asking questions about their renewal. Martinez Construction wants to meet with you next week. We're hemorrhaging Latino-focused clients, and frankly, we don't understand why. I almost laughed. After firing me for not fitting their culture, they couldn't figure out why Latino-owned businesses were fleeing to work with someone who actually understood their communities. What exactly are you proposing, Derek? A meeting? Today if possible. We have a proposition that I think you'll find beneficial. 3 hours later, I walked into Sterling's headquarters wearing a charcoal suit from a Latina designer and carrying a portfolio that contained everything they'd refused to see when I was their employee. The same marble floors, the same oppressive corporate artwork, but I was no longer the person hoping to be accepted. I was the CEO of the company they now needed. Derek led me to the executive boardroom, not the small conference room where they'd fired me, but the one reserved for high-stakes negotiations. 5 executives sat around the mahogany table, including Sarah Mitchell, the CMO who'd signed off on my termination, and Robert Chen, the CEO who'd probably never spoken to me directly when I worked there. Maya, thank you for coming. Robert's voice carried the practiced humility of a man who'd just realized he'd made an expensive mistake. We'll get straight to the point. We want to acquire Corazon Cultural Strategies. The silence stretched for several seconds as I processed what I'd just heard. Full acquisition, Sarah added. You'd become our executive vice president of cultural markets. Complete autonomy over Latino marketing strategies. Equity stake. The works. I set my portfolio on the table and leaned back in my chair. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want to buy the company I built after you fired me for suggesting the exact strategies you now want to acquire. Derek shifted uncomfortably. The market has evolved rapidly. The market hasn't evolved, Derek. Your awareness of it has. Slowly. Robert leaned forward, his dealmaker instincts taking over. Maya, we're prepared to offer $15 million for full acquisition. Plus a 3-year employment contract at $400,000 annually. $15 million. For a company I'd started with liquidated retirement funds and the determination to prove that my culture was an asset, not a liability. That's a generous offer, I said carefully. But I have a counterproposal. I opened my portfolio and slid a document across the table, a contract I drafted that morning with Elena's help. Sterling becomes Corazon's client. 3-year exclusive partnership. We handle all Latino market expansion and cultural strategy for your entire client base. $7 million annual retainer. The room went dead silent. Sarah's pen stopped moving mid-note. You'd remain independent? Robert asked, his voice tight. Completely. You get access to our expertise and cultural intelligence. We get to maintain our autonomy and continue building relationships in communities you've spent years alienating. Derek's face had gone ashen. Maya, we can't justify a $7 million annual expense for one demographic that controls $1.9 trillion in spending power. One demographic that represented 54% of U.S. population growth last year. One demographic that Sterling has systematically ignored while hemorrhaging Latino-owned business clients. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. But you're right, Derek. It is expensive. Netflix spends $8 million annually on Latino content development. McDonald's allocates $12 million for Hispanic marketing. But if you'd rather continue your current approach of losing Latino clients to agencies that actually understand their needs, that's certainly your choice. Sarah cleared her throat. What about our existing Latino campaigns? The work we've already developed? I almost smiled. You mean the Google Translate campaigns with stock photos of families that don't represent your actual customers? Sarah, the average Latino family makes 34% more shopping trips annually than the general market. They're 67% more likely to recommend brands they trust. When Rodriguez Insurance worked with Corazon, their Latino customer retention rate hit 96%. Under Sterling's previous campaigns, it was 61%. Robert's calculator was out, fingers moving rapidly across the numbers. The contract includes quarterly performance reviews, I continued. If we don't deliver measurable results in Latino market penetration, customer acquisition, and retention, you can terminate. But if we exceed benchmarks, which we will, the retainer increases proportionally. I gathered my portfolio and headed toward the door. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, Martinez Construction finalizes their contract with us, and Familia Foods will probably follow. Your choice. Elena was waiting in the lobby, pretending to read a magazine while actually filming my exit for our company's behind-the-scenes content series. How did it go? She whispered as we walked toward the elevators. They offered $15 million to buy us out. And I told them they could pay $7 million a year to rent our expertise instead. The elevator doors closed on Sterling's world, and I felt the same satisfaction I'd experienced 18 months earlier when I decided to stop trying to fit into their culture and start building my own. 2 days later, Robertson called personally to accept our terms. 6 months after that, Sterling's Latino market division, powered entirely by Corazon Strategies, had become their fastest growing segment. Their stock price jumped 31% when they announced a partnership with premier cultural intelligence firm Corazon Cultural Strategies. In their quarterly earnings call that I kept the termination letter framed on my office wall, right next to a photo of my grandmother Carmen cutting the ribbon at her 5th restaurant location. Not as a reminder of rejection, but as proof that sometimes the people who think you don't fit their culture are just revealing the poverty of their imagination. The culture they'd said I couldn't fit had become the culture every company in America was desperately trying to understand. And I was no longer asking for a seat at their table. I was charging them rent to sit at mine. The week after Sterling announced our partnership, Derek Thompson sent a personal note. Maya, I wanted to acknowledge that we made a mistake. Your vision was right, and our loss became your gain. I wrote back, Derek, it wasn't my gain. It was my destiny. There's a difference. Because that's what my abuela Carmen had always taught me. Mija, when they tell you that you don't belong, it's usually because they're afraid of how much space you'll take up when you realize how much you're worth. She was right about that too. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.